Eve, the main antagonist in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc-V manga. Now, technically speaking, her story begins is that she is a scientist from the future who becomes desperate thrall to the Genesis Omega Dragon, aka the God Card. After specifically when her lover Adam was actually vanished across time after discovering the powers of the God Card, she actually then used God itself to actually travel through timeless to find him anywhere in the world, and which then kind of led to the fact of dueling Yuya Sakaki and reclaiming the Atom Factor's essence, which are also remaining in Yuya Sakaki himself. Now, of course, she actually had an entire team to be able to do this. She had Isaac, who was a very good friend of theirs, who was also be able to provide the scientific discovery and development of solid vision technology. They also even have this character called Ren, who apparently is actually like a descendant of YGO specifically, which was kind of interesting. And then of course you have Sora, which, no big surprise, Sora again is once again a spy, which doesn't really make big surprise to me, as like Sora was a spy for Duel Academy in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc-V manga. The same thing goes that he was specifically a spy for Eve and her team. Also, a little bit of an interesting story here. The fact that they've actually made this story, like an Adam and Eve, which, if you do not know, in the real world, there is actually a story called Adam and Eve, which is specifically in Italy, primarily told through iconic resonance in art and religious architecture, focusing on the themes of temptation, fall, and exile. The key specifically in these artworks of the original Adam and Eve were basically based on human anatomy and also the fall. You can go ahead and check these out if you want. The links of these resources will be in the description below. So yeah, technically speaking, I think that Konami and the people who did the manga actually wanted to, take that and try to utilize that in in a different way into interpreting the story for Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc-V specifically, but it's a little bit more futuristic and based on literally one particular dragon card. I'm not saying that it's bad or anything. I just didn't even think that this was actually a thing. I didn't think they would actually take this route. But to be fair, that is actually, pretty interesting. Now, technically speaking, throughout the times when you see Eve specifically in some scenes of the manga, you actually realize that Eve was actually, kind of losing a bit of her life every time when she uses the god's power. You see, the Genesis Omega Dragon actually corrupts her and also a few others, like Isaac for instance, turning her into often inhuman agent of its will. She actually used the God card on Ren specifically in order to save him in particular, so that no one else could possibly suffer, along with Isaac, I think, and then having Sora to try to finish off the job, which spoilers, unfortunately, if you haven't seen the manga yet, sorry about this, but Sora obviously loses this duel as well. Technically, this villain's pretty tragic. I mean, for her to be like another female villain in a Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga series is actually pretty cool. I can't lie, this was actually pretty sick and pretty awesome. However, that's not the only thing that pretty much comes up into mind, because she is not the only one that pretty much comes into, come into play here. The one and only god monster, the Genesis Omega Dragon himself, is also considered as a completely character himself, and she also takes over Eve throughout the final duel against Yuya Sakaki. Technically, the Genesis Omega Dragon himself is kind of similar to Eve in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal manga, surprisingly enough. The Genesis Omega Dragon also tends to actually feed onto the likes and hopes of on some of the characters that they specifically want, and let them relive in the times and place that they want to believe that is actually happening in that particular time and place of that event. However, unfortunately, it's not exactly real. It's nothing but an illusion of their own thoughts that has been manifested due to their loss of what they really want back. That's basically God's power. That's what he does. He manipulates them to thinking to believe that the events of what they once lost, they can be able to revisit them over and over and over again. So yeah, you think that freaking era was that bad? Mate, I feel like Genesis Omega Dragon is actually even more terrible and more awful than himself. And Eve alone was just another desperate character just looking for love by the looks of things. It's pretty tragic. Not maybe as tragic as I from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Reigns anime, but I will say it's still pretty tragic. In the end, of course, after the defeat of the Genesis Omega Dragon plus Eve, because since that Genesis Omega Dragon took over Eve throughout like the rest of the duel, she finally was actually able to reunite with Adam, which, thank heavens, is pretty good. At least Eve actually finally manages to find her happily ever after in that sense. Now, let's go to the deck specifically. Her deck is consistency of a lot of cards, especially with her extra deck being consistent with a lot of Fusion, Xyz, Synchro cards. Especially Pendulum Monsters, because she does use a lot of Pendulum cards as well in her deck. With the main deck specifically, she actually uses a card such as Mystic Factor Balthazar, which is a level 10 Pendulum Effect monster, Mystic Factor Melchior, Mystic Factor Casper, and of course the one and only Genesis Omega Dragon, the main ace and the main controller throughout the entire duel. And of course you got like spell and trap cards such as Mystic Hellgate and Heaven Gate. As for the extra deck monsters, she actually uses cards like these. Now this is very interesting because these are not cards that do not belong to her, but they are basically cards that she actually gathered from time and all the specific eras from other Yu-Gi-Oh! Era series. Starting off with this one, Phantasm Emperor Trilogy, which is basically a fusioned monster, and that is specifically relating to Yubel's deck from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. And technically speaking, that card never existed in any of the anime whatsoever. The next one is a Synchro card, which is Time Lord Progenitor Vorpgate, which is basically based on Zone, the final boss from Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, and that's specifically a Synchro Fairy monster. Again, also, this card actually never existed in the Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds anime either. And of course, as an Xyz monster favorite, I loved this one the most, which is Number X Infinity Dark Utopic Dark Infinity, which is a rank 10 Xyz warrior monster. Of course, this is a reference to Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal. Now, however, this card never also existed in either of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal anime, nor that it was even in the Zexal manga. And trust me when I tell you, these cards are pretty busted. They're pretty overpowered and they're pretty strong. So whether you want to think that maybe when it comes to, you know, Dark Infinity, for example, you could possibly say that it might have belonged to John Thousand, maybe it could possibly belong to, you know, Yuma if he was like, you know, still in his Dark Zexal state. So it could specifically belong to Dark Zexal himself, maybe, if he had more potential. Which, by the way, I actually did do a video of that a long time ago. So if you want to check that out, link is in the description below as well. So yeah, Eve's cards had a very interesting way on how to be able to change the duel and take control of the duel. And may I actually remind you that technically speaking, she basically pulled off a paradox. Like, she is legitimately like a female version of Paradox from Yu-Gi-Oh! Bonds Beyond Time. I mean, think about it. She's literally a scientist from the future, and she's trying to travel through time to be able to get to her goals and needs. She's exactly like Pegasus. Now, I am starting to wonder, in quick theory, whether, I don't know if this is going to be relatable or not, but if somehow that, you know, Eve is somewhat related to Paradox, that would be a little bit interesting. Not that I'm saying that they would be, I'm just leaving that open. If you did somehow, you know, have Eve duel against Paradox, that would be an interesting duel itself, because they are both time travelers, and it would be interesting to see who exactly is the most powerful time traveling duelist, Eve or Paradox. Mystic Factor plus the Genesis Omega Dragon versus Paradox's Malefic deck. Or if you even actually put Eve against Zark, for example, who also, because technically since that God merges with Eve, and the same thing goes with Yuya after hand with when the spirit of Zuck combines literally all 4 of Yuya, Yuto, Yuri, and Yugo, what would that end up being as? I mean, what do you think that the results in that would happen? I mean, I honestly don't know. I mean, like, Zog is more of a menace than anything, but when it comes to a time-traveling menace like Eve, for example, that would be interesting as well. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Do you think that Eve was like a tragic character? Do you think she was at least another good female villain in a Yu-Gi-Oh manga series, just like Era, for example? And even also, I'll even add this one as well. Like, do you think she would also be capable of defeating Era too? Like, they're pretty good female villains in their own respectful rights in both of their respected manga series of Yu-Gi-Oh! And what do you think of her character and her backstory? Do you think it was worth it? Do you think it was a good story to her? Do you think that there should have been a little bit more potential within it? Let me know that in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Click on the notification bell to never miss a video. And as always, my name is Mad Dog. Stay safe, stay healthy, and may your days be mad and rad!